Okay, so let's start. Good morning, good afternoon, or good evening to you whenever you are. My name is Inna Melnykovska. I am Associate Professor at the Department of Political Science at CEU, and I will moderate this event devoted to this impressive, comprehensive, here you are, book, both in physical form and in the context as well. Written by Bálint Magyar and Bálint Madlovics, published by CEU Press this year. So the event is hosted by the Institute for Advanced Study at CEU and is planned for approximately 1 hour. So let me point your attention to a short but important note. This event will be recorded and the records will be used in the future book promotion. So, who is on the discussion panel today? Of course, the authors. So let me say a few words about them. Bálint Magyar is Senior Research Fellow at the CEU Democracy Institute. He holds a doctoral degree in political economy from Laurent University. He held fellowships and visiting positions from Open Society Foundations, the New School, the CEU Institute for Advanced Study. Formerly, he was an activist of the Hungarian dissident movement, founder of the Liberal Party of Hungary, member of the Hungarian Parliament, and Minister of Education. And in addition to all these activities, since 2013, he has published and edited numerous books on post-communist so-called mafia states. So the second author, Bálint Madlovics, is a political scientist and economist. He also joined the CEU Democracy Institute as a research fellow recently. He holds an MA in political science from Central European University and a BA in applied economics from Corvinus University of Budapest. He was a research fellow of Financial Research Institute in Budapest and contributed and co-authored several publications with Bálint Magyar. Finally, he is my former student. So the dream of each professor, including myself, is that her students surpass their masters. I'm still active in doing my research, but I think Bálint Madlovics has good chances to make my dream come true. So apart from the authors, we have 3 outstanding discussants, and I will present them one by one as they will talk. After discussants and the following reactions from the authors, we will take time to discuss your questions, dear audience. So you are welcome to post your questions to the authors or to the discussants by using the chat box, please. So let me turn to the discussants now. And I would like to introduce Masha Gessen, who is a staff writer at the New York and a professor at Bard College. Masha Gessen is also the author of 11 books of nonfiction, 2 of which make use of Bálint Magyar's previous work on mafia state and autocratic transformations. So Masha, the floor is yours.
Unmute, please.
Hello. Thank you. It's a huge honor for me to be participating in this. So I met Bálint Magyar, I believe, was it 2014 or 2015? I was in Budapest doing some research for what I thought was going to become a book on sort of post-communist backsliding. It ended up becoming my book, The Future is History, which was primarily about Russia. But I was meeting with people I had known before, people I was just meeting, various Budapest intellectuals, and the night before I was leaving, I had dinner with 2 friends who said, "Oh, you have to meet Magyar Bálint." I was like, "I'm leaving tomorrow." They said, "You have to meet him." And so Bálint was kind enough to agree to meet for breakfast at my hotel, and my world was transformed. And the best description I have for how my world was transformed was when I was struggling with writing my most recent book, which is called Surviving Autocracy, I was just going through draft after draft, sort of not being able to find how I wanted to approach the subject. And as I was explaining to my partner what I was trying to do, I said, so when Bálint Magyar writes, or when you read him, it's like the light goes on. It's like you don't react to the ideas in his work as sort of, oh, what an incredibly original way to think about this. You just go, of course, that's what we've been looking at all along, but didn't have the language for describing it. And I think that's the biggest contribution in both the most recent book. I mean, the most recent book is sort of an amazing, massive contribution, but it gives us language for thinking about these regimes, right? As Bálint has pointed out himself, I think on numerous occasions, we were handicapped in thinking about post-communist transformations by using the wrong language, by using language borrowed from Western ideas about liberal democracy, both because we had the assumption that that's what was going to happen, and because that's the language of political science. Right? And when the language that you're using is wrong, then you can't actually describe. So, this is a book of language. It's like a language textbook for understanding post-communist regimes, which is impossible to underestimate the significance of that. And I've been using just a very small part of that language. The ideas about autocratic transformation, that it has 3 stages: autocratic attempt, autocratic breakthrough, and autocratic consolidation, where the autocratic attempt is the stage when autocracy can still be reversed through electoral means, and autocratic breakthrough, and Bálint, correct me if I'm misinterpreting something, and the autocratic breakthrough is when constitutional or the structural change happens that make it impossible to reverse autocracy peacefully. So when I was writing a book about the United States, which was the first time that I've done that, and it seemed like a very risky and perhaps not intellectually rigorous proposition to try to apply a model developed for post-communist regimes to the United States. So I just kind of thought, okay, well, let's see what happens. Let's see if this actually helps me think through things. If I try to apply this, it was terrifying how useful it was. And it was useful in many ways, but there's one particular way that I would focus on, which is I think what happens when you propose a new language. There are things that we don't think about when we talk about the United States that ought to be thought about, right? So, for example, Bálint Magyar in his work highlights the risks of a monopoly on political power as sort of on the way to autocracy. Now, in the United States, we actually think that a monopoly on political power, or what people call the trifecta, where both houses of Congress and the executive branch are in the hands of one party, is the only way to get things done. And we're not used to thinking about it as a huge risk factor and as potentially the beginning of an autocratic transformation. Packing the courts is another thing that we talk about here, but we don't talk about it as a possible instrument of autocracy. And so these are 2 examples, but particularly the monopoly on political power, of things that could be brought out of sort of a murkiness of political conversation and have the effect of having the light go on, and actually change certainly the way I thought, and I hope the way that's at least some of my readers think. So thank you, Bálint.
Thank you very much, Masha. So let me turn to our next discussant, Henry Hale, who is professor of political science and international affairs at George Washington University and co-director of the program on new approaches to research and security in Eurasia, PONARS Eurasia. He has benefited from many conversations with Bálint Magyar as well. So in recent years, they met and discussed the topics of post-communist transformations a lot. And Henry also contributed an introductory chapter to Bálint's previous book, Stubborn Structures. Henry, the floor is yours, please.
Hey, thank you very much. I'm also honored to be invited to participate in this book launch. I've certainly very much enjoyed talking with Bálint over the years about these subjects and benefited immensely. And while I'm sure there's much more to come, I think this book in some ways, together with Bálint Magyar and Bálint Madlovics now kind of teaming up, this is kind of a, I mean, I don't want to say crowning achievement because that somehow implies an end. But I think it's at a minimum a culmination of some sort of a lot of work that has been building in this direction, and it grows out of some of the same concerns that they've had that that Masha mentioned, that I've shared, which as somebody who has studied and taught post-Soviet regimes for many years, found it very frustrating that the conceptual apparatus that we have used to think about these regimes just doesn't fit. And this includes textbooks that we have available to use in our classes. It's always just been very difficult to find how I would like to communicate the nature of these regimes to students, textbooks that would somehow match that structure. And I always wind up kind of almost teaching against, like, while the material in the books is often good, right? I'm not saying that people who study these regimes have been inaccurate in any way. It's just the framework has been not appropriate. So, what a little more specifically, the frameworks have involved kind of the idea of democracy and authoritarianism, often treated as a dichotomy, certainly in the political science literature. And textbooks, among other things, tend to be structured around the formal trappings of democratic societies. For example, a presumption that the main actors in politics are entities like parties, parliaments, the judiciary, business qua business, right? Business acting as a market business organization. And so, these are not useless, concepts, right? We learn a lot about some things by using them. We learn about how, Russia, like the country that I've probably studied the most, but other countries have fallen short of democracy. We learn a lot about how these regimes have many features incompatible with democracy and compatible with authoritarianism. So there's a lot of research and a lot of writing on, modes of repression, corruption in these regimes, kleptocracy, censorship. And all these things are certainly important. And, so we have a lot of knowledge about what these regimes are not. We also have a lot of information and know a lot about how institutions in these countries, many of these countries, I don't mean all post-communist countries clearly, but a lot of them, institutions like parties, parliament, don't behave like they should in a democratic context, and how they're manipulated by the regime, often considered fake. So, we learn a lot about that, but what it comes out is we learn more about what they are not than about what they are and about how they work. And I think one thing we need to recognize, which this book does very admirably, is that these regimes do work, right? They have a system, they endure. Many of the post-Soviet countries, again, that's my primary area of specialty. I mean, they've survived in basically intact, with some permutations, some interruptions, for upwards of a quarter of a century. So just to kind of talk about what they're not and assume that you know, the features highlighted by what they are not, like authoritarianism and censorship, is really all that's going on in that simple way, and that is why they're enduring, I think risks missing a lot that's important. And so, you know, what this book does by Magyar and Madlovics is to provide, you know, what I find an amazingly comprehensive set of conceptual tools, in their words, the conceptual tools, and an amazingly comprehensive set that is not useful only for judging these regimes and kind of measuring them against some yardstick of authoritarianism or democracy, but understanding how they work in their own right as regimes. So I like that they provide what they call a toolkit rather than a theory, but clearly there is theory there, right? You know, it kind of informs the tools, but they don't take a strong position saying how the tools should be used. And I think that's a brilliant contribution, because it lays the foundation for building much richer theory than could be presented even in a you know, over 500-page book. And you know, it's not just a vocabulary, you know, it's a language, it's a grammar for understanding these regimes. And so I think just some of the key insights that come out of it, I mean, there's so many, you know, can't possibly talk about them all, especially when being asked to talk for 5 to 7 minutes. But you know, that kind of what differentiates a lot of countries is the degree to which there's a separation of the political market and the communal activities of citizens in society. You know, and I would kind of characterize maybe the communal action as kind of what you might call the network action, right? When people are acting in terms of kin or you know, different personal connections that they might have. And that the central actors are often thought of, you know, best not as you know, like the ones that I mentioned earlier, parties and parliaments, but these extended networks of actual personal acquaintance that often involve particularistic exchange, you know, not necessarily quid pro quo, but often an exchange of very material benefits that can be arranged and rearranged, but often penetrate these different other actors, right? And so, you know, I think what it helps call attention to is the fact that, you know, even when we see entities like parties or parliaments in other countries, it doesn't mean that they're fake if they don't look like what we think they should be doing. They just have other functions, right? They serve other needs, and they're doing other things. There's other reasons why they're there. It's not purely a Potemkin village. And you know, so I think all this makes possible, you know, what the book also provides, which is a fabulous, you know, first, among other things, typology of regimes in the region, which is totally novel and it makes perfect sense, and you know, and gets very refined. I mean, once you get into the more refined components, I think one could find quibbles, but you know, the key is it provides a framework for understanding the types of regimes and their variation. And I think the last contribution that I would highlight is, you know, I love how it's been written so that it can be used as a textbook with all kinds of associated materials, you know, which can be useful for students. And so now that it's out, I'm looking forward to figuring out how I can integrate it into my teaching. Just in the last minute, maybe that I have, or 30 seconds, I'll say, you know, just so it's not like entire praise. I think my one, you know, kind of quibble with the book that I would mention is, you know, I don't know that it needs to be embedded in a civilizational frame, right? So, you know, a lot of the logic of the book is kind of framed as if the separation of the political, the market, and the realms of communal action is unique to Western civilization. And while the book has a sophisticated treatment of civilization that I think goes beyond Huntington, you know, I personally just don't see that as necessary, and I think it risks, you know, kind of inviting debate that may not, you know, be productive. So, you know, that would be my one kind of quibble with the book. Like, and I think if for people who are concerned about civilization, I would urge them to kind of read beyond that and make sure that that doesn't, you know, distract from the larger contributions in which, you know, that the book makes. But you know, like I say, that's just really a quibble. I think this was a landmark work, and I look forward to you know, seeing it be more broadly engaged, including in this forum. So thank you.
Thank you very much, Henry. Let me move to the third discussant on our panel, Iván Szelényi, who is William Graham Salmon Professor of Sociology and Professor of Political Science at Yale University. He is also a fellow of the American Academy of Arts and Sciences and member of the Hungarian Academy. He is author and co-author to many works. I'm sure most of you read his Intellectuals on the Road to Power, Socialist Entrepreneurs, or Making Capitalism Without Capitalists. And just some informal remarks. There is a long-standing cooperation between one of the co-authors and Iván. Bálint Magyar, already in early 70s, was his research assistant during the sociological survey organized by Iván in Hungary. And in the mid-80s, Bálint was a visiting researcher at the University of Wisconsin at Madison and worked together with Iván in one of his projects. So Iván, the floor is yours. Please unmute yourself. It's working, we can hear something. So
now, do you hear me?
Yes.
Yes, yes.
Yes, so finally we seem to be communicating, right?
Yes, please.
Okay.
The floor is yours.
All right. So I'm just talking a couple of blocks away from the Bálint lives, and I'm very pleased to have been invited to this discussion. Indeed, I have been working with Bálint for a long time in various capacities, and have been learning from him a great deal from Hungary. You follow me, you hear me, right? I do not get any feedback from
Yes,
you.
yes, yes, we are. Yes.
You do, okay. So then I'll just continue. Well, I have been intrigued and interested in the problem of post-communism. I think I used this term the first time in 1987 or something. I thought it was a smart and a new idea to describe Hungary at that time as a post-communist society, which is beyond communism. And it turned out to be a good concept, I think. It still tells us that there is a simplistic notion that what happens in the fall of communism is simply a transition from a communist dictatorship to liberal democracy. This turned out to be too simplistic. There is virtually none of the former communist countries which can be called today simply as a liberal democracy. There are some which are really close to a liberal democratic system, but most of them are on trajectories which are somewhere between a communist dictatorship and a liberal democracy. And unfortunately, for many of us, there is not a simple trajectory towards liberal democracy from a communist dictatorship. Well, I have been a great admirer of Bálint's work very early on, when he introduced the notion of mafia state. I really believed that was fantastic. It was really, to my mind, the first serious attempt to try to describe the system as such. So Bálint offered a systematic description of post-communism. This was something I have been trying to do for a long time, but never really got as far as Bálint did with his very early work. Now, the new book, this 800 pages long anatomy of post-communist regimes, is especially extraordinary because it not only makes a clear triangular distinction between communist dictatorship, liberal democracy, and patrimonial autocracy, but he also, virtually almost on all post-communist countries, he describes the trajectories how these various countries over the last 30 years were moving along these directions. I think it's quite extraordinary in terms of richness of the empirical material and the originality of theoretical discussion. The early work was mainly focused on Hungary. Now this book is really the theory of post-communist formations and the varieties of post-communist formations. So I want to congratulate, I think this is an extraordinary achievement. And since I have been in this field for something like 30 years, studying post-communism, I think I am a witness who should be credible that this is an unusually great achievement. So thank you for inviting me, and Bálint, congratulations.
Thank you very much, Ivan. So let me give now the word to the authors, let's start in chronological order. So Bálint Magyar, probably you have the first word.
Thank you very much, Inna, and thank you very much, and thank you for the discussions, for these these nice words what we put here now. To all of them, I have long professional relations, I would say, and I learned a lot from all of them. The book what we wrote now together with Bálint Madlovics is nothing else than tries to follow consequently some basic assumptions. One is what about already Hale was speaking, that there is a different historical development of countries in Western liberal democracies and those post-communist countries, and the illusion that after the collapse of communist regimes, these countries will be definitely and unavoidably liberal democracies. It's just a question of time and the space, how fast they are going through this trajectory. This is the only thing, and we will find these countries among the countries of liberal democracies. It was a false assumption, and this is what practically killed the transitology, the so-called transitology, that approach which considered it as an unavoidable event. The next phase of the mainstream politology, which investigated and even now investigates these countries, we characterize as hybridology, which described this regime as hybrid regimes, which is practically a confession for the necessity for having a new language what they could not create. Hybridology just tries as different mosaics to bring together that concentrating mainly on the political institutions and mainly on the formal institutions, that how can we make differences among the post-communist countries, and at the same time when a lot of things cannot be explained in this way, then they consider these things as deviances from a mainstream liberal model. We wanted to say that these are not deviances, but maybe the basic characteristics of these regimes. And then comes the next, I think, very simple idea, which constitutes the basis of our book, that the spheres of social actions, if they are not separated, as these are separated liberal democracies, then if we try to concentrate, for example, just for the sphere of political actions and political institutions, then this is a misleading effort from us, because in that way, as they are existing in liberal democracies, they do not exist in these countries. And now comes from this a lot of things, and this is how we had to try to build up a language, a comprehensive language. Of course, this language was not invented totally by us. We incorporated a lot of things from other researchers, even if they do not belong to the mainstream politology in this respect. For example, it was a very important thing when I could read the book of Hale, Patronal Politics, which tries to understand these informal and patronal relations within these post-communist countries. Or even when he has a new term for that, when he tried to explain that why a color revolution is failed, and he says that the democratic transformation, institutional transformation, is not accompanied by an anti-patronal transformation, then just the word, that anti-patronal transformation, it had an enlightening effect for us as well. At the same time, we tried to visualize also our concept, and of course we were very much interested in that what we write could be used as a textbook, as it was emphasized before by the speakers as well, because if you build up a new language, then you have to give a vocabulary, and the vocabulary is nothing else than definition of certain words and certain categories, that in what context and in what sense do you use them. So if you don't mind, now I try to show you what we try to develop, a three-dimensional model, for describing these countries, the post-communist regimes, and to analyze and trying to define somehow different type of trajectories. As Iván Szelényi already mentioned, that in this model, we just defined three polar types of these systems. Liberal democracy, where in this website and this three-dimensional model, for which we have to say thanks to Gábor Ligeti for developing the website for our book as an accompanying tool for that, and Tibor Szatmári, who could develop along the lines of the book this type of visualization, where, for example, in this triangle model, you can see that if we think about liberal democracy, then you can see immediately a definition of these things and referring to the different parts of the book. So this model with this six system: liberal democracy, communist dictatorship, and patronal autocracy. These are the so-called core models, core regimes, and there are three intermediary ones: patronal democracy, which means that when none of the patron-client networks are in a monopolistic position, and there is a fragile or delicate equilibrium among them, then with the tools and means of the democratic institutions, none of these patron-client networks can get into a monopolistic position. Patron autocracy, when one of these patron-client network monopolizes the political power, and through this, as Masha Gessen referred to our work, through an autocratic attempt and autocratic breakthrough creates an autocratic rule, while between communist dictatorship and patronal autocracy there is a market exploiting dictatorship, what we call, when it's a dictatorship in that sense that the monopoly of political power and the one-party system exists, and at the same time there is a more or less or partly a large share of free market operation in that society as well. And if we want to show the different trajectories, now let me start one which is still considered to be like Estonia, and we can show as it is goes until these days what can be considered to be a liberal democracy. If we take into consideration an other one, a typical way, such countries, now I take the example of Romania, which was never a liberal democracy, but much more a patronal democracy, where the different political parties just represented the closest suits of competing patronal networks. And there is a third typical road. Let's take the way of Kazakhstan, you know, which was not even real patronal democracy, but very early turned into a patronal autocracy. And the last one, for the fourth one, China, which is practically is close to a market exploiting dictatorship. Now, when we try to consider not only the political institutions but other elements of this patronalism, what we call, and patronalism, what was defined and used very broadly in the work of Hale, but there are, as we see, four dimensions of that, namely that when the formal institutions are transformed and replaced by informal ones, the normative regulations are replaced by discretional ones, when the collective decisions are replaced by personal ones, and when the bureaucratic competencies and the dependencies are replaced by patron-client dependencies. This is a kind of different way of patronage. Then in our system we can go to other characters. For example, when we can speak about the formality of institutions, and now I take out from the picture the trajectories, but this is now their position, let us say, nowadays from the middle of the 2010s. Then you see that we divide, for example, in this slide, the institutions according to what is the dominant form. It is formal, semi-formal, informal ones. Or if we go through, let us say, the dominant economic mechanism, then we see that while the patronal autocracies are characterized by relational market redistribution, and we cannot find there, in a classic sense, private property, because the dominant form of property is power ownership, where power and ownership coincides and colludes, and therefore there is no power without ownership, there is no ownership without power. While in the third part, in the communist system, a bureaucratic resource redistribution is a dominant form of the so-called market, of the integration form of the economy, and the state property is the dominant. Now we try to create such a system where even these layers, and there are, as you see here, some of them, from patronalism of rule, ruling parties function, corruption, etc., ideology, dominance of economic mechanism, ruling parties, members, and so on. We see that we should try to find such trajectories and such positions where it's consequently and coherently explains a country's place, a post-communist country's place in this system, you know. And then wherever in a given a certain time these countries are and change their position, then you can see them there. Now you see on the right side that now this situation is 1985. If we go to another one, is 2001, how they moved into this regime. But it reveals a very important thing as well, about which first I read in the work of Harris as well. Namely, he used very consequently the term regime dynamics, which said that they are in a permanent move, these regimes, and within the regime dynamics, the cycles of these regime trajectories, with which he tried to understand that, for example, the so-called orange revolutions or color revolutions, why we can witness a democratic breakthrough, and within a few years democratic backlash, backsliding. And he used it that if these revolutions are not accompanied by anti-patronal transformation, then it results such a cycle. And now this is one of the basic ideas of our work. Then when we want somehow to model the trajectories, we cannot concentrate only on the political institutions and using the terms for describing liberal democracies, but we have to see the other way as well, that whether the democratic breakthroughs and democratic consolidation is accompanied by anti-patronal transformation or anti-patronal consolidation at that time or not. And in such a way, we can differentiate that, for example, most of these color revolutions were not accompanied by we cannot accompany it by anti-patronal transformations as well, and this created this backlash. And now, if I want to go to the first slide, just to show you on an example that what is the difference, for example, in our model between Hungary and Poland. I put the two countries on the picture, and now I take the last position. One moment, excuse me. Here is Poland. If we just think about in an axis, think of an axis from democracy to dictatorship, then it has a false view, as if these countries, Poland and Hungary, would be very close to each other. Why the situation in their autocratic transformation process? But in reality, they are. If we have a look at in this triangle model, we see that they are very far from each other. So while Poland is going toward the direction of a bureaucratic conservative autocracy, at the same time Hungary is a patronal autocracy and a subtype of patronal autocracy, a post-communist mafia state, which means that while Poland is ideology driven, Hungary is ideology applying, while the center of the political decision-making is within informal institutions in Poland, is taken out from the formal institutions in Hungary, while the formal body of the leadership of peace is the owner of the place of real decision-making. In Hungary, the Fidesz leadership does not bring any real decision, while the political party PiS is a centralized party. The Hungarian Fidesz is just a transmission belt party, a vessel party and a transmission belt party, while the freedom of the private property in economy is tolerated and respected, in more or less respected in Poland. In Hungary, they are under the pressure and threat of a permanent blackmail and predatory activity of the Fidesz, and creating a patron-client relation among them. And while you can see party political nepotism maximum in Poland, in Hungary, the sociological form of the ruling elite is an adopted political family, which is a clan-type organization. And we call this a mafia state because when this clan-type organization is operated like a criminal organization, then they can be called a mafia state. And such a way, we have to make a difference between, let us say, between Poland and Hungary. While Poland could be considered an authoritarian attempt towards a conservative autocracy, and they are still not in the phase of autocratic breakthrough. It's still a very heavy autocratic attempt, but the autocratic breakthrough did not happen. In Hungary, the autocratic breakthrough happened already in 2010, and as it happened in 2010, since that time there is a autocratic consolidation with less and less possibility for an electoral restoration of the democracy in Hungary. So excuse me that I was so long for it, but it's I somehow tried to summarize some basic elements of our approach and notions, what we developed with Bálint Madlovics together in this book, and how it could be used in education. And the last sentence, that in this three-dimensional model, when you use it and you can have some seminars, you can tell that, okay, a professor or some of the students, they do not agree, and they think, according to them, Poland went on another way, not this one, but this one. Hungary went this way or this way, and then they can save it. So it wants to be a kind of interactive model in that sense, that it would open questions and not totally give final answers for them, just opening the space for a discussion using the language what we try to develop. Thank you very much for your patience. I try to now stop sharing these things and give the floor to others, with Bálint Madlovics as well.
Okay, thank you very much for this presentation. Just let me give a short note that these DRI-D models, as well as other teaching supporting materials, can be found on the special webpage, postcommunistregimes.com, and so there are a lot of interesting for teaching material there. And before I give the floor to another Bálint, let me just encourage the audience to put their questions via chat box at the bottom. You will see chat, then press the button, there will be chat window opened at your right, and please write your questions, both to the authors and to the participants of the discussion panel. So, Bálint Madlovics, the floor is yours now.
All right. Well, first of all, thank you very much. And thank you very much for all the participants and everyone who joined. And special thanks also to the discussants. I feel really very honored to hear all these kind words about our book. And I'm really I feel exhilarated to hear all your words and all your ideas and insights about about what we've done with Bálint. I think I would like to speak about three things, perhaps not as long as Bálint did, but I think these are important points. But first of all, I would like to answer the question, the unquestioned question, namely how I teamed up with Bálint. So, because we have heard from the discussants that they are quite familiar with Bálint Magyar himself, and they also they had known him for a long time. But how about me? How I teamed up with Bálint? And this is also a question because my friends often tell me that we are quite an odd couple. You know, when Bálint first wrote about the mafia state, that was in 2001. When he was writing about the first Orbán government, I was back then like 6.5 years old. So I was quite young back then. And I must say I haven't read the article also back then because I had just started primary school. But the first time I read him, that was in 2013 when he first published a book about mafia state in Hungarian. That was an edited volume of studies entitled In Hungarian Magyar Polip, a Posztkommunista Mafia Állam. And what is very interesting about that, if you look into that book, many of the core ideas that Bálint mentioned are already there. So many of the basic ideas are already there in a very, shall I say, essayistic and underdeveloped form, but you can find the idea, for instance, of dominance of informal institutions over formal institutions, or the idea of the adapted political family, as we call the key ruling elite type of this patronal autocracy and the key ruling elite type of post-communist regimes, and also the idea of patronalism and patron-client relations that was already there in 2013, and many other things. And basically, I just found I just saw a lot of potential in it. I didn't know that it would become such a huge book. We actually, with Bálint, when we first talked about this, that we would write a book, we believed that it would be like 300 or 400 pages tops. But then it just kept growing and growing and growing. And now, as you can see, it's this 800-page book. But okay, so that's for the first point, that how I teamed up with mine. The second is a short reply to Henry about civilizations. So what are we doing with civilizations? And I think this is quite interesting, or quite important as well. That we, as Bálint said, a key idea of our framework is that in post-communist regimes, there is a rudimentary or lack of separation of spheres of social actions. So the spheres, the political sphere, market sphere, and the communal sphere. And of course, this doesn't mean that the spheres are in liberal democracy or in the West are completely unconnected or they are isolated. We don't say that. We simply say that they are separated in a way, in a kind of institutional way, and their cooperation is also formalized, and it's also mainly transparent and whatnot. We discuss these in the book, but we say so that in post-communist regimes there is this lack of separation, and we actually had to answer where this comes from. So basically, we had this problem, or so that why are we talking about post-communist regimes at all, and where this comes? So what makes this region distinctive from Western regimes? Why aren't Western regimes like this? And I'm sorry. So, and basically, when we started working with this civilizational framework, and we thought that this is quite enlightening, and it fits extremely well. It gives a very apt answer to our problem of where the lack of separation comes from, and also as Huntington separates the Western Christian region from Eastern Orthodoxy and Islam. That's a very revealing framework for classifying these regimes. I understand that there are many criticisms about this, but I think most of the criticisms concern the clash of civilizations idea, that these civilizations actually act and they fight each other, And this is not what we say. We only take the framework of civilizations and use it to identify, as we say, the three historical regions of the former Soviet Empire. So this Western Christian, Eastern Orthodox, and Islamic region in Central Asia. So, and this is basically, so we use it as a descriptive model, and we find it very, very illuminating and very, very apt. And the third point I'd like to make is about the book that many of the discussants mentioned, and also Bálint, that this is a very comprehensive volume. And indeed, it's 800 pages long, which is quite something. But and it is long, but I wouldn't say it's verbose. So I wouldn't say it's very long. Actually, I would say it's quite concise, because if you consider the range of topics that we discuss in this book, from politics through economy, to society, from ideology to I don't know, rejierstwo, or which is corporate trading, as it's exercised in more violent and informal and centrally-led ways in post-communist regimes, and many other things. If you consider those topics, really writings about those topics can basically fill libraries. So 800 pages is really not that long about it. And actually, I'm more or less thinking about this book as an encyclopedia, as a kind of very highly structured, not just alphabetical encyclopedia, as many encyclopedias are, but something that's really anatomical, that really tries to understand the connections between these. And perhaps this is where theory comes in, as Iván Szelényi and also Henry said, that this theory basically connects the different aspects and the different actors, institutions, and regimes that we describe in relation to post-communist countries. And this is basically how the book is structured. This is why it's called an anatomy. But one thing is that mainly, if you think about the features that Bálint mentioned, and he also showed this triangular framework, which I am still amazed by, not the framework itself, but this 3D presentation, which was made by Tibor Szatmári, who did a really magnificent job. And I'm also very thankful for that. But most of those features, like elections or parties or the dominant economic mechanism, those are what we call regime-specific features. And those are the features which make up the triangle, but there are many other features that we think are not specific to certain regime types, but they are specific to certain countries. And we call them country-specific features, like country size, or natural resource abundance, or the lack thereof, or ethnic cleavages. And of course, these are also very important. And there is one chapter about them. Most of the book is about the anatomical regime-specific features, which Bálint talked about, but there are also these country-specific features. And this is very important, and I wanted to mention it because if we think back about this triangular model, we can see that, for instance, Hungary, we say that Hungary and Russia can be classified around with the ideal type of patronal autocracy. And many people, when we tell them this, are quite dubious that this doesn't seem to make sense. After all, Hungary is a small country. It's part of the EU. It's not resource abundant. It's not ethnically that divided, or it's not that huge, not as huge as Russia is. So basically, so there are indeed many differences, and these are important differences. But when we say that by regime-specific features they are the same or they are very similar, we basically say that they are of the same species. Basically say that when we talk about Hungary and Russia, we say that they are both dogs, let's say. Perhaps one is a Chihuahua and the other one is a Great Dane, but they are both dogs, and they are quite different from, say, from cats, or from fish, or from elephants, which are other types of regimes, we may say. And this is, but this is an important point I wanted to make, that that basically we discussed 12 countries we described the trajectory of 12 countries, and we only described them closely with respect to these regime-specific features, but the country-specific are also mentioned. And thank you very much again for participating and being here.
Okay, thank you. We have a couple of questions, and so let me tell a few of them collectively. So first of all, we have a question about dynamics of post-communist regimes. It's appreciated that you have a sort of dynamic view of what was going on via our last 30 years, and your comprehensive approach helps to explain what happened in these countries in the past. But does your conceptual framework also help to explain what to expect? So is it possible to use it to do a sort of forecasting? We have COVID pandemic and all the restrictions and new tendencies related to this. The governments, including the countries in your focus, are reacting. As we speak, we have new protests in Belarus. So it seems like dynamics continue in these countries. So how it's possible to use your framework to explain the future. And the other question is related to conceptual stretching. You actually, so usually the main point of criticism is about that one or another concept is going too far, and concepts are blamed to go for conceptual stretching. In your case, it's rather other way around. People think that there are some points in your concepts that can travel to other countries. Masha Gessen already pointed to this, that potentially you, at least some of your conceptual parts can be applied to advanced democracies, to some attempts of de-democratization there. So what do you think about this? How far your conceptual framework can travel? And whether it should be changed if it is applied to advanced democracies. And then we have the question that is related to the previous work by Bálint Magyar, specifically related to mafia state concept that was presented in one of the previous books, where this mafia state fits to your current comprehensive conceptual work, and whether it makes make any sense to talk about mafia state as a term, or whether some other terms like patrimonial authority could fit better to describe the reality there. And then the last question is related to liberal democracy, which could be seen as a sort of ideal type of political economic system, state organization. So your conceptual framework is very much based on the reality, but here you have a sort of ideal types included. So what is the place of these ideal types, in particular of liberal democracy, in your conceptualization? Is it not another attempt, the question is a little bit critical in this sense, to transfer the ideal type of liberal democracy to other regimes that perhaps have different trajectory, different paradigm of development? So let me, I think I was able, yes.
Well, I think for the first round it will be enough. It could be enough to answer.
Yes,
yes. Yes. I would like to start with something. I spent 20 years in politics, not considering the time before the regime change as an anti-communist dissident activist, but and therefore it happens that that when somebody reads my works, then they mix these different roles. in this role of describing this regime, I am a sociologist. So when you describe a predator, then it's a separate question from it that how could you hand down a predator, or how could you neutralize a predator? These are two different questions. And the problem is that in the analysis of these regimes, sometimes this two dimension is mixed, or which is not good, because it's a different question. So now when we wrote this book, then consciously we excluded that question, that how can you change these regimes? This already would be a different task, a different thing. When you at the same time, if these two dimensions are mixed, I think it's a real obstacle of a realistic description of these societies. Otherwise, you cannot give a real answer that how could you get rid of such a regime. Let me tell an example to you that when the EU, for example, thinks about sanctions against those countries where the corruption is high, then they have the assumption that the government is fighting against corruption, but only they are not enough clever or skilled how to fight corruption. And therefore, they always try to give special advices how to fight against corruption for these governments. This is a practice when you try to educate a lion, for example, to be vegetarian. Then you don't know that a lion wouldn't be vegetarian. So if you meet a criminal state, if you meet a mafia state, then it's a complete stupidity try to convince the leaders that how they should fight against corruption, when of course they fight against unauthorized corruption. They are fight against that corruption which is not organized by themselves, but practically it is a criminal state because the state is operated completely as a centralized criminal organization. Another question was from you that whether we could use other labels for this regime, patrimonial state or other things. I think that these are useful categories, but they refer only to a certain part of the problem when you want to describe it as a state or a regime. When we try, for example, to describe and approach these countries from the side of the actors, the ruling elite, what is the ruling elite, then a lot of people says that it's a clan state when they describe that those who are acting in it, they are not in formal institutions, but it's an informal body. When it's in this informal body, then it's hierarchical. When it's hierarchical, it can have not a bureaucratic hierarchy, but a patronal one, a patriarchal type, like an extended patriarchal family, like a clan, an adopted political family. So when somebody says that it's a clan state, it's a valid statement, but it refers only to the actor. When somebody uses the term that it's a patrimonial or neo-patrimonial state, then they refer to that feature of a given state, that the public authority is appropriated for private gains and used for it. And of course, then it refers the action itself, how it targets the power institutions. But somebody says, for example, and others think that these societies are kleptocratic states or predatory states, then it refers also to the action, but not refers to the institution themselves, but whether they try to take away with state coercion on an illegal way goods and assets, public assets, or even as a predatory state, it can be taken away, expropriated from private owners and to channel it to their own coffers of the adopted political family. And when and therefore they can speak about, for example, corrupt state or captured state or criminal state. These are different stages of this type of I would say, illegality, what they use, because in a rent-seeking state or a kleptocratic state, it's not necessary to use violence or not necessary to use blackmailing certain actors, just taking away public revenues, public incomes, resources, etc. But in a predatory state, in that phase, we are speaking of that when, with the means of state coercion, they take away, with hostile takeover, I would say, corporate trading, the assets of even private owners. And when we are speaking about the legality, therefore, it's simply a corrupt state, or a captured state, or a criminal state. In a corrupt state, we think of such a system where a lot of people in public offices, they are corrupt, but it's not a system, definitely. When we are speaking about a captured state, then it's not necessarily centrally organized. It shows that, of course, there are permanent channels of patron-client relations, but they are not still centralized and monopolized. When we are speaking about criminal state, then it's not a deviancy already of a regime, but a constituting element that the regime is operated as a criminal organization, centralized and modern. And when these four features, the clan state, we can say for a regime, declare for a regime that it's a clan state, a neo-patrimonial state, a predatory state, and a criminal state at the same time, then we can say that they are mafia state. So when somebody says about that it's okay, it's a predatory state, then of course it's a valid statement, but it speaks only about one element, one segment, what we want to describe with the term of mafia state, for example, which is also only a sub-model of the patron autocracy, because there are patron autocracies beyond the communist, post-communist regimes, for example, the sheikdoms in the Persian Gulf, which are patronal autocracies, but they are not definitely criminal states. So these are different models. And then speaking about your last question, to which I would like to refer, that whether this language can be used beyond the limits of the post-communist regimes, post-communist countries. Yes, partly with reservations, because there are some axioms what we did not open up in our analysis. For example, the formal bearer of political actions and political power in these post-communist regimes, these are political parties. But in other regimes, these can be churches, for example, in theocratic regimes. In other regimes, it can be the military itself, which is not the case in the post-communist regimes, like in Egypt. You know, it's much more based on the military power and not the power of a party. But we did not open up these axioms because we wanted to focus first on these post-communist regimes. But of course, there is a huge opportunity and potential in this language that if we try to expand the validity and usage for other regimes, then of course we can think again very consequently that what are those axioms what we have to open up.
Okay, and before I ask Bálint Madlovics to address the rest of the questions, probably I will add another one from the audience, because this is the only one we have at the moment in addition. And this is related to the question on dynamics somewhat. So this is, the question is about whether there is any kind of treatment to the disease of being non-democratic, being mafia state, whether your conceptual framework also helps to address the factors that either furthering or reducing resilience against developments towards mafia state. So what about explanations, courses, that treatments that might help to counterbalance the developments towards mafia state? So Bálint Madlovics, probably you can take this question when you talk about dynamics
Yes, of course. But before that, there was one question which I think Bálint didn't tackle, and that was liberal democracy being an ideal type, and whether we idealize liberal democracy. If I understood the question, that it referred to that we work with a very idealized picture of liberal democracy, which I don't think we do. So actually, if one looks into our book, it's very, and we were very deliberate about this. So we very much wanted to be realistic about all of our concepts and all of our ideal types. They are ideal types, of course, so that no country fits perfectly to the liberal democracy concept, but it's also not very detached from reality. Let me just mention one thing very quickly, that we do discuss lobbying, for example, in a great detail. We talk about this, how interest groups influence political processes in liberal democracies, and we talk about how cooperation emerges between big business groups and politics. But we also discuss how this differs very much from post-communist phenomena. Just let me mention one thing, one bit of food for thought, perhaps, that when there is lobbying and there is cooperation, there is this kind of in liberal democracy, the big business or interest group goes to the parties. Both the political actor and the economic actor remain in their own sphere, in the sense that the political actor aims at political benefits and the economic actor aims at economic benefits. The political actor gets campaign contributions to get votes. He is focused, they are focused on the political sphere. They are focused on political action, and they get help from economy to cement their elite position in the political sphere. Whereas the economic actor gets treatment or regulations or preferable tax codes or whatever. They use that to get a competitive advantage in the market sphere. So these are so the cooperation or the influence of, for example, big business is very much there in liberal democracy, and many people argue, rightfully so, that this is not a very ideal element of liberal democracy, perhaps from a normative point of view. But we do discuss it from our positive descriptive point of view, and we also discuss that this still means that the spheres are separated because the actors are focusing on cementing their position in their own respective sphere. So that is one thing about that. Is just a reply about liberal democracy. And as for dynamics, as Bálint mentioned, we didn't really want to delve into this question of treatment to the disease. We first wanted to describe it, or let me not use the term disease, because Bálint also used another metaphor that if you describe a predator, then it's not the same thing as describing how you can hunt down the predator. And indeed, but I think it is very important to notice that it's a pivotal element to know what we are hunting for. So description, what we do in this book, it's not the treatment. It doesn't contain the treatment. It has a few words about how from different stages of autocratic transformation you can turn back, and with electoral means or extra electoral means, and also about color revolutions. We discuss color revolutions, as Bálint already mentioned. So there are some bits and pieces if you want, but it's a very important to know, going back to the hunting metaphor, that if you go hunting, then you have to know what you are hunting for. Are you hunting for a small animal? Are you hunting for a whale? Are you hunting for an elephant? So you need different kinds of strategies there. You need different kind of means. And basically what we say is that first, now from this book, one can learn what these regimes are, how they operate, and also we do have many sections on how they preserve themselves. So what are the elements that, for example, patronal autocracies like Hungary or Putin's Russia, so what are the elements that they use to stabilize their regimes, and how they can preserve themselves also in the political level within their own elite or adopted political family, and also outside that within society. We discussed that in great detail. So I think understanding that is a very important first step to finding the treatment if one is interested in that.
Okay, thank you very much for this, all the answers we had. I'm sure we still have a lot of questions, but not at the moment in our chat room. So probably the audience, and I see many outstanding experts in the audience, can approach you with their questions via email or so. I will end this discussion for now. We are a little bit already our time limits, and I know that some people have to go home because of the curfew. So let them go for now, and let me end this discussion. Thank you very much, all participants, including the authors, the discussants, and you, dear audience. Bye-bye.
Thank you very much. Bye-bye.
Very much.
Bye-bye. Thanks.